Hi, I'm welcoming Jason and Lasha from Ocean X Labs. Take it away. I love the. Where did you get your whale image to start?
I'm pretty sure I stole it off.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I wish I was that artistic. Hi everyone, my name is Jason Holmberg, and I'm here presenting with my colleague Lasha Otarashvili. We're talking about faces, flukes, fins, and flanks, and multi-species re-ID of individuals, and how it's affected how we change building AI pipelines. We represent Conservation X Labs, a 501c3 nonprofit here in the United States. And specifically, we represent the Wild Me Lab, which is a distinct set of staff inside Conservation X Labs. Now, generally, our mission statement at Conservation X Labs is to fight the sixth great mass extinction. And we use machine learning to scale global conservation to do that. Along the way, currently, in our use of AI, we are supporting over 1,900 field biologists across the globe for marine and terrestrial species. They are tracking, as of this week, just north of 221,000 individual animals, whether they're snow leopards or whales or leafy and weedy sea dragons. They've recorded over 1 million encounters, and we've collected over 10 million photographs. And this community and this data set are growing every week. Now, if you think about Wild Me as this lab, we really look like an AI startup. So we've got 2 machine learning engineers. We have a back-end software engineer who aligns the data and the machine learning models and the APIs. We have a front-end software engineer whose job is to make all of that actually relatable to a field biologist who's going to be logging in through their browser to begin tracking an animal population. And then we actually have, which is unique, a support engineer who listens at community.wildme.org and supports those 1,900 marked individual or researchers across the globe who are tracking these marked individuals and actually answers questions and holds us accountable that the machine learning actually works. Now, one thing to keep in mind, we are not really researchers, although Lasha definitely verges into the research territory. We are AI engineers. Our AI models don't just have to work or be promising, they have to work 10,000 times in a row, or I get called on a weekend and the server's down. Things go wrong and our lives are made miserable, but that's how we hold ourselves accountable. So we have to look at the most recent academic research, adapt it, harden it, deploy it, and get it to work in a sense that people can log in through the browser and be productive and come up with new scientific output. Why do we as AI engineers work on this? Well, we find that to combat extinction, our mission statement, that there are long gaps between population assessments, sometimes 5, more often 10 or 15 years to get a population estimate for a threatened population. There are then slow iteration of protection strategies. How do you figure out whether protection strategy, banning fishing, allowing fishing, putting up a fence, taking down a fence, those are simplistic, but how do you figure out if any of these things actually work if you can't iterate the data on which you define success? There is a gap between promising technology and its field application. Read lots of papers claiming many results for AI models. How do you actually see if those work in any kind of scalable system? Funding, conservation is underfunded. Conservation tech is the expensive part of an underfunded industry. I could not make this harder on myself from a monetary perspective if I tried. There is a skills gap. AI models are Python-based. Hand that to a field biologist, and what do you get? Somebody who walks away. So we have to actually marry the skills of the field biologist to the skills of an AI engineer and a software engineer. And then we have to apply experiment versus engineering experience. As I mentioned, if it doesn't work 10,000 times in a row, it's causing problems for us. And we have to be able to get these what are experiments and papers, open source code, very promising, into the hands of field biologists. Our solutions are to develop continuous monitoring strategies and estimation of wildlife populations, and to scale, modernize, link, and support frontline conservation efforts. We don't make any prescriptions about how you should deal with a local wildlife population or a crisis. What we do is put tools in the hands of researchers in the field so that in context, they can analyze the data, apply AI to speed and scale their own efforts, and come up with locally driven conservation strategies. So you might know or have come across some of our initiatives. There's the African Carnivore Wild Book, helping researchers all over Africa track hyenas, lions, leopards, African wild dogs. There's Fluke Book, which we're mostly going to be focusing this presentation on, multiple species of whales and dolphins, all in a common online platform where researchers can log in, even collaborate and share data, and then run AI to track individuals. There's Shark Book, the Amphibian and Reptile Wild Book, And when we began years ago, all of these projects, they all seem to kind of make sense, right? Put the African carnivores together in one online platform, put fluke books or whales and dolphins together, sharks, leopard sharks, whale sharks, amphibians, and reptiles all together. This was actually bias that we applied. From an AI perspective, one of the things we're going to be talking about in this presentation is these separations of communities of researchers of thematic species really aren't making sense. More and more, we're finding that each of these different communities is operating with the same data structures. And even the AI could care less whether it's the fluke of a sperm whale or the flank of a leopard shark. And we'll talk more about that. Our work is applied across the globe. Here's a few different species and examples of where field researchers are operating, logging in, collecting data, using AI to run a few very specific functions, ultimately to get to the point of being able to estimate population sizes. So this is reductionist, but I like to start here to demystify anything that we do. There's really four things from a computer vision perspective that most people do with AI. One, and the one that I devalue the most and wrongly, because it's actually some of the biggest time and cost savings in AI, is simply ignoring empty data. So we call this on our side whole image classification. It's used in aerial surveys where 95 to 98% of your data can be empty as you're flying over the savannah looking for elephants. It's used in camera trap surveys where you have lots of false positives as trees and grass sway in the wind and trigger your camera. And it's by far the biggest and immediate value to users in just helping them get through high volumes of data. The next thing we do is we localize, or the traditional bounding box. Is there an animal in this image? Where is it? Draw a bounding box. And even that can go into count-based population estimates, whether you're flying an aerial survey and localizing tiny little pixels of an elephant, or whether you're doing camera trapping. This is a great data point to go into population models. The third task we do is once we have an animal localized, we'll label it. And that might be viewpoint labeling, left or right. Some animals most animals do not have symmetrical patterning. So comparing the left of a leopard to the left of a different leopard would be a good question. Comparing the left of one leopard to the right of a potentially different leopard is not a good question. And then health. So we can look at wasting disease and other characteristics of the body that are emergent that can be labeled. And then as well, behavior. What is this animal doing as it passes in front of the camera trap? The fourth, and this is where we're very unique, is the re-ID of individuals. And really importantly, we look at this from a real world perspective and from an open world perspective. What does this mean? From an open world perspective, it means that animals will enter a study population and leave. We do not create AI models that memorized fixed lists of individuals. We assume that a re-ID model needs to go into the field and handle the cases where new animals enter the population through birth or immigration. Animals leave. Ideally, for example, from a data capture perspective, you can go out in the morning, take a picture of an animal, and match it in the afternoon, all without having to re-engage the AI and machine learning engineers to retrain the model. We also assume a real world in which we actually value data diversity. We don't want individuals to be re-identified, or at least our training data to come from successive frames of a single video. They need to come from diverse real world conditions of different lighting conditions. The animal is wet, the animal is dry, the animal has multiple viewpoints in which it's facing the camera, it's going up a tree. All of that is actually critical to us to create real world AID models or re-ID models. We use the re-ID also for population estimation, marker capture models you might be familiar with. And also, once you track individuals, you can do social grouping and dynamics, do movement studies, track which individuals are moving between populations, et cetera. All right, just a few quick examples of whole image classification or throwing out empty imagery. Now, if I were presented with this image, which is a real world image from the CASA survey, I would tell you it is empty and I would move on. However, if you can see the tiniest little yellow bounding boxes, we had an on-site team in Tanzania do the data labeling here, and these are in fact for elephants. So it gives you a sense of how hard the whole image classification problem can be. And then the scale is that we have 800,000 images that we have to get through just like this, and in different biomes, et cetera. The labeling problem. So once we have animals localized, which is our detector algorithms, which can be trained on different species and can even have parts. Like you'll see, we can detect both the African wild dog and the tail. we have to label these. Fluke, right whale, left, lateral, the right side of a spotted dolphin, tail, left, African wild dog, etc. So that's an example of the labelers, which are then the input into re-ID algorithms. So this is a beluga match taken by a NOAA drone. NOAA experts gave us the labeled data to train an AI model. And here, there's a couple of interesting things going on here and what makes this real world. These are different dates, so different diversity in the viewpoint. The animal never actually appears fully out of the water. So we always have occlusion in every single image. And another interesting thing is the human researchers curated this data looking at very subtle scarring features, which can shift position in the image and may be entirely ignored by the AI. An important perspective of the new AI models we use that are embeddings based, we give them all the pixels and we don't tell them what to look at. In this case, as opposed to the scars that the humans used, the AI loves to focus on this lateral ridge, which is, from an explainability perspective, completely indecipherable for me. Each of these AI models is then put into a Wildbook platform. Wildbook is our open source, Flukebook, African Carnivore Wildbook, et cetera, are all implementations of this. This has a beautiful feedback loop. Because we deploy the AI in platforms, the AI provides time and cost savings. It brings more researchers in. We onboard people every day. The time and cost savings, the onboarding of individuals, the onboarding of data, the labeling of individuals feeds training data back into the models. The models have more data. We retrain them. They're more accurate. They benefit the community. And so we're just getting the benefit of scale by adding more species and adding more researchers. For the Flukebook platform, for example, right now, we're tracking 413,000 encounters. Over the past week, we've added over 1,000. And of those 413 encounters, they represent 77,812 individual whales and dolphins that are being tracked by a community of over 500 users. All right, so we have extensive experience scaling with real-world ID, building these communities, but we have also hit a number of scaling problems, and I hope they can be of benefit to those building acoustic AI pipelines as well. Per species projects are a lot of work. So on a per species project, you get limited data, which means that your model has limited generalization and likely limited accuracy. We have different visual features across species, whether it's flukes or fins, require different technical approaches, which means you can be developing two things instead of one, which is less efficient. Custom user engagements and data schemas. Every single researcher asks us to build a universal data importer, and all of them come from a different place with their data in terms of spreadsheets, et cetera. So each of these engagements requires us to learn a new data format, blend new data. Retraining the models or retraining different models is often required for expansion and cross-application. Let this be a warning to you. One of my favorite examples, for the amphibian and reptile wild book, we trained a salamander model, right? The detector was just the localizer. We asked them for 2,000 photographs. They gave us 2,000 photographs. We trained the model with 95% accuracy in predicting viewpoint. They then, the first day we deployed it, told us it didn't work. We said, well, why didn't it work? And they showed us a photograph. Turns out they gave us 2,000 left side photographs, and on day one of using a model that we had generated for them, they put in a right side photograph. And so that's an example of why diversity from the start in a project is critically important, and why a project can fail if it is just too limited in the data it ingests, and why these very limited species-specific projects can require a lot more effort than you anticipate because you have to retrain. Importantly, per species projects, of which maybe we can run 6, 7, 8 a year, don't scale to solving the extinction crisis. All right, the other thing is multiple computer vision algorithms and architectures are expensive to support. They provide us with many different problems to debug, optimize, synchronize. And so not only they're fighting for our time and the disparate brain and the limited brain space we have to solve many different types of problems, but they're also simply fighting for computer resources. You can get a history of what we've been working on. Excuse me. So from 2014 to 2020, we started working with some of these original kind of crude matchers, very powerful, but not AI-based, and really feature-based. So Hotspotter is a texture matcher. It extracts pixels, looks for textural differences, and looks for patches of textural difference in different images. Fin Finder is an edge extractor and matcher, much like dynamic time warping. Curve rank is the same. Essentially, what our approach was for many years was find a feature that is distinguishable per individual, learn to extract that feature and match that extraction. Whether it's a line or natural patterning on the flank of an animal, use these algorithms in a very bespoke per species way to do matching. 2021 is where we had the game changer. We began switching to a modern embeddings-based system. How is this different? Embeddings-based systems don't so much focus on a feature or pixels in an image, but rather focus on extracting the concept of individuality based on the pixels present into a vector, a list of numbers. And it turns out we started seeing a lot more accuracy, and we started seeing not just personally running pose-invariant embeddings and training it on data sets that were rich enough, but we also started seeing competitions emerge in which competitors were doing embedding-based systems that we could learn from. We even participated in our own competition and ran it in conjunction with NOAA, which was the Beluga competition. And this began to lead to our current architecture, of which Lasha is the architect, of multi-species embeddings-based models. Our first experiment was to put 23 species of whales and dolphins. And what I mean by this is we took 23 species for which we had marker capture catalogs and 4 or more photographs of individuals at a particular viewpoint. We chucked them all into the same model and came up with a single re-ID model that can be applied for all of those species, and we tended to see improved results. And Lasha will talk about that further. We then repeated the experiment with 9 species of terrestrial carnivores, 13 species of face ID, 3 species of sea turtles. And one by one, we began to see improved accuracy and generalization, even when the species were wildly different. The 23 species of whales and dolphins includes flukes, fins, and the aerial photographs of belugas. They look nothing alike. Our current state-of-the-art, of which Lasha is going to present, is a 54 species, 61 class model that includes all of the above. So whether it's African wild dogs, snow leopards, whale flukes, dolphin fins, etc., it's all in there asking the question, who is this? And what we've seen as well is original computer vision projects that used to take years to come up with a new algorithm. We're now getting down to the point where, given a clean data set, we can train it in with just a matter of days, which means the cycle of onboarding and retraining and expanding and scaling is improving. Let me hand this over to Lasha for technical explanation.
Are facing, but there really is a single reason I actually did it, which is previously we had all these single species specialist models, and you had a breakthrough, and somebody had to go back and retrain each and every one of those. So maintenance just goes away. Also, all the previous algorithms would have all these our own preconceptions of what would be useful baked in. So this could be really low-level texture patches of zebra stripes. This could be curves of the fins. And something simple came up. These algorithms really had to be babied. You had to segment out the background, and God forbid the baby zebra popped their head into the images. Everything would just go bunk. So with deep learning, we kind of let the model figure it out and learn useful features for generalization. So initially, when we first switched to the deep learning models, what we did was we took all the species we had and trained a model for each of those. Kind of mapped out the performances of each species in a bar based on the data that we had available. And this is a pretty classic strand BC, which is more data, the better you do, which was one of the big drawbacks, because that meant that anything maybe from this tail, we weren't really realistically able to support because the performance was not there. But we did see, though, that there was some generalization ability, like bottlenose dolphins, which were one of the biggest data sets we had, used to be lateral shots of the fins. So we would take the model trained on the bottlenose fins and cross-apply it to spotted dolphins, for example. And it would be reasonable. better than starting from scratch. So the idea was put two of those together, maybe it becomes different. And 2 species, 3 species, everything became worse. But somebody was adamant enough to say, okay, I'm going to do this and put a big part of all species, and these are only aquatic, but these also included flanks of terrestrial animals, faces of primates, some of the aquatic species that don't really mix with classical flukes and fins. This would be, for example, whale sharks with all their spot patterning, and train the joint model. And this was the result that we got, the blue line. So all of a sudden, not only each species does better, but the playing field is leveled. The species with lower amounts of data can do just as well as the species that with lots of labeled data. So the hope appears that we can maybe make this generalizable. To push our point further, we wanted to know how it would act for species that it has previously not even seen. We had no training data for. So we did these experiments, leaving each of the species out of the training and just testing the model. And surprisingly, it held up pretty well. For some of the low data species, it was better, the knowledge acquired from all the others was more useful than just the small subset of clean data that we had for that species. So we got a couple of big wins here. Obviously, the performance was the thing. Scalability, because they were much faster and it can run purely on GPUs, so we can serve a lot more requests per day. It suddenly opens up this spirit of collaboration, because now we can show that your data actually helps others and others' data helps you. And of course, application to new species, suddenly we can extend our reach to places we couldn't think of reaching. And also this concept of acquired robustness. So you'd have these partial occlusions, viewpoint shifts, and the model will still hold up. It won't be as fragile as the old generation algorithms. But what did lose is explainability. We know it was good, but even now, we do not exactly know why. The users really miss this old school interface of just point-to-point showing what really corresponds between the features. And it's two things. It's trust. They feel like they can relate more, which is pretty fair, but also it saves them a lot of time going through this and actually verifying the model decisions. So we had to give this up. But with the robustness came another thing, the open set performance, which is pretty important for us. We try to have models that generalize across domains or could be trained on a data set, but will perform in other regions for other researchers. So just plotting this out, more or less, the model holds up. Even for individuals, it has not seen at all as they come into population. As a part of blend robustness, Jason mentioned we had this big pipeline of cropping the bounding box, aligning different metadata. For example, big challenge we had is if we had lefts and rights, previously we wouldn't be able to match them unless we first labeled those as lefts and rights and flipped them to be on the same side, which is a pretty easy task, but once you have to do it hundreds of times a day, it becomes a real chore. So the algorithms generally implicitly learn those. But not just that, but you would see behavior that would actually be a bit suspicious, also a bit impressive. For example, this would be some of the examples of the matches the algorithm would make. For example, I remember spending so much time, I can't really admit, just verifying this match of a jaguar, of a lynx. It's hard because the body is deforming, it's dark, it's hazy, an animal has rotated, but many experts verified and it's a correct match. Also, some of the previously hard stuff that could be easy for humans, that could be babies popping up, that could be things that are not exactly aligned with the orientation that you expect for it to be. I mean, even this guy, partial occlusion, we couldn't detect him. And at least now, we can find him and looks pretty sad. We can go and cheer him up, get him some cookies. Some basic stuff also, like full bodies, matching full bodies to partial crops, because many researcher groups have different protocols. And well, historically and practically, it's almost impossible to get them to consolidate on a single thing. So all of a sudden now we can match across different works of different groups and also prompt them to want more. But there's this point. There's the thing we unlocked when we do this pretty well now, which is give us a picture and we'll reference it to an existing known of individuals pretty confidently. But really, the problem goes on. The more sophisticated version of the problem would be groups that are sitting on tons of image data, but have never really associated any of the images between them. So that would be what we would call the cold start problem. Lots of unlabeled data, but no references to get going. And since we had these hints of generalization, that was naturally the direction we chose to advance and move towards, to maybe make the product even more useful. And this is a classical way you'd try to visualize what the model does. You take this vector or number embeddings that are high dimensional space, map them down into 2D, and just plot them and give them colors that correspond to each of the individuals. And kind of what you want to see, and you see is more or less is same clusters keep to the same color. So there is this proximity in the embedding space. But these colors are ground truth data, so we already knew. And we try to push simple approaches to try and maybe simulate that we don't know them and try to associate. And this is a really baseline crude approach. All the blue lines are ones we were not confident enough to assign. The rest of them were assigned. And what we got was 70% of the samples in the population we correctly clustered at 95% plus precision. And high precision point was deliberately chosen because these problems have this effect of compounding error. Really, if you start reassigning fits into different places, all of a sudden new population comes in and the error just increases. So even though we always talk about the quantity of data that we need, really keeping it high in terms of quality is, I would say, the trade-off we're willing to make. And pushing this further would be, yeah, this is quite nice, but can we, like, in other ways, quantify how well this works? So we took a model from scratch and only used the labels that were predicted by another model and trained the model on that. And it kind of gets weird with all these different models, but what we saw was that the weakly supervised or weakly labeled data, as we call it, was almost as good at training a model as you would have just using the ground truth. So the promise is maybe iteratively we can use this interplay between the models or models interaction with itself to get bit by bit a bit better at the problem. So this starts from scratch, start from zero. But now what would happen if we integrated the multi-species backlog of experience that we have and synthesize it with that? And another experiment, what we did was, previously we had a large data set, it's from another experiment, started slowly adding bits of labeled data and jointly training the model with all the other 40 plus species that we had. And what we saw is this huge spike, whereas 5% of the data almost let us close the gap between the full data set training. So again, this mutual benefit taking a step further, which is now the data requirements that you have for solving this RIAD task are slashed almost an order of magnitude. And to be completely fair, sperm whales are a bit of an easier side in terms of re-ID. So we did take another species. We took gray whales that do not look like anything else that we have. And this is more of a fair representation of what you would expect, bringing in a completely, say, alien species of whatever else we have. Pure logarithmic curve, whereas 50% of the data almost gets you to the asymptote. And with this, I guess I wanted to open this up, maybe as practical findings, but also discussion of many smart people working here of how we could approach it. But the vision that we have now is we need to move from this task-specific model, which does a lot, into a more generalized multifunctional agent that really aids your survey and not just the particular match that you're willing to make. And there's multiple facets to this problem that we are aiming to solve. The ultimate goal is a large sample of unlabeled data. How do we curate it? And I think the important facets are first, knowledge injection. This might sound like a hard sell, but we still think we're not going to be able to automate humans fully yet. So we still need them. We're going to need to find a smart way to take expert feedback and quickly adjust so that we can get a quick grip onto the new data points that are coming in. Also, explainability. Right now, it's a black box. So we need the model either textually or visually describe what it's really using to make a decision. And also, the reason we want to be task specific is not all tasks are the same. There's a big need of, for example, skipping the re-ID completely and just arriving at population counts. So to do that, what you really need to know is not accurate labels, but all the biases that you can account for in your statistical model. So opening up the black box and really know if you're undercounting and overcounting, even though if you're not confident on a specific decision level, could open up the possibility of many surveys being done. And at some point, maybe have a full interface, whereas with an agent, you can auto-curate, add in new species, and also retrieve patches of species that satisfy a specific condition. This could be somebody looking for a specific condition or happening with an animal, specific geolocation, or it could be just asking of, here's the error you made, so go back and find anything else that looks the same, that you probably have made the same error, to just rectify itself. And along with that, one thing I might be interested in is really what I'm hearing now is spectrograms are not really different from visual data. So MUID is purely open source, free to use. So maybe somebody wants to take up on it. We're pretty passionate about collaboration. And I want to say thank you and willing to take questions.
Let's start with first question. Can you say a bit more about how you train your models? So I understand these would probably be either vision transformers or CNNs.
Okay.
And maybe, sorry, second question, do you use any data augmentation? So again, I would imagine that corrupting synthetically your data would be easy.
Yeah, so we try to stick it as vanilla as we can. So it's just a CNN backbone at the end with a think of like fine-grained classification head, arc phase loss, derived base loss, and we inject augmentation. So there's two ways we kind of inject augmentation. One is explicitly we do perspective warping, color shifts, flips, but also another thing we do is we don't pre-process our data. And in that regard, you get different variability in terms of the animal viewpoint, in terms of lighting conditions, or the way the data has been captured. And given enough sample, the model implicitly learns those and remains to be robust in the application phase.
Maybe, sorry, I don't want
Yes.
to capture all the time. So another question. So can you have an indication to the biologist taking pictures whether this picture is good or not, right? Because I imagine that you can't have very simple, maybe the same CNN that produces some kind of quality of the image, how useful it would be for the re-ID, and then suggest, for example, to take another picture, or if you have a sequence of images or a video, select the right frame.
Oh yeah, it's initially, historically, we used to have this explicit CNN for labeling data quality, so it would predict quality score for a sample. But we found the quality is a really fluid, subjective concept. It's really hard to quantify. So now the evaluation method that we switched to is actually going from the back to the front, which is get the data subset, train a model, and see if the data quality is enough to train the model that can re-ID. And if it's not, then we go back to researchers and say that the quality is probably not there, which is a lot of work, but only reliable way we've seen it make work.
I think especially in a multi-species context, data quality becomes a very difficult problem. To give you an example of how we would expect something to be a data capture failure that would fail a quality test, we had, for example, 6 inches of a leopard's tail appear in a camera trap image, and the algorithm was more than happy to identify that as the correct leopard, and we could cross it with subsequent frames or previous frames to see the leopard, and in fact got the right match. With the Iberian lynx examples, the data is of middling quality, and some of that data we wouldn't generally allow to pass a quality check if we were approaching it with this bias of a single species approach. So we're starting to relax our standards on what's a capture quite a bit because we just don't understand the problem anymore of what is quality or not. That said, I've thrown out Amur tiger images because the tiger's in shadow and you can barely see it. So that's just not good training data from an individual ID perspective.
Several questions. First one though is, could you back up there? It was too hard to see when you showed all those different species and their labeling. It was a bar graph.
Oh yeah, I found labels didn't really hold up. But this
Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
What's that species that it really just doesn't work on?
Yeah, one of the species here is blue whale. And we're not exactly sure why, because it's not really different from any other species. So we really attribute it to data quality. But can't say for sure unless we do experiments with higher quality. It could be our own bias.
Okay, that was the first question. The next question, you mentioned you train an embedding, and then you mentioned like a multi-classifier CNN head. So I'm trying to understand, like maybe he was, are you doing something where you're doing like contrastive learning to train an embedding, and then once you've got a general embedding, then you train a small classifier on top of that? Is that what's happening?
No, actually the way we derive embeddings is classifier-based losses. So that would be arcface is the one that's most prominent, and there's a whole family that came from here. So ultimately, you train it as classifier with each of the class being your individual, but the way the head is structured, it has the same interaction as a triplet loss, where it tries to drive away the similar classes and put together similar classes. And there's one big advantage to arcface loss. I guess the way it's structured, your receptive field during a gradient update is much larger, in the sense of, instead of comparing a triplet, which would be 2 similar pairs and 1 dissimilar, which means you only get information from 3 samples, arcface kind of weightedly takes information from all the samples in your population, which means that model learns much quicker. I think we have around 20x reduction in training time. And also it makes do with imbalances. So with triplets, you want to be careful that same individual doesn't really show up too often, because then you're biased. But with this, every individual gets an equal weight. So even if somebody capturing took a burst mode photos of the same individual, which would ruin your algorithm, now you have this tolerance that you can actually still extract useful features from that during training.
Last question. Are you guys, for people working in other tasks, people are using these large foundation models that have sort of a shared embedding space between text descriptions and images. And I'm wondering if you're thinking about going in that direction so you could give it different tasks just with the right text prompting.
Yes, highly likely we'll go. Ultimately, the results are going to decide whether we do or not. But the thinking is, right now we have lots more data than just the ID part that we're not really utilizing. So all the metadata tags, all the different downstream tags that we use, and they are order of magnitude scale higher than the re-ID, which is the trickiest to label. So we are thinking one of the valid approaches to this agent system would be to get these tasks and pre-train something foundational with the textual input, maybe do alignment as well if you want to do prompting, because that's one of the things we want to do is people telling models of why did you make this decision, or can you make this decision based on looking at this, because it's sometimes useful. So I think probably in some way or another we'll end up finding ourselves in that space.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'll just underline, we've been seeing some really similar results on the acoustic side using global birdsong embeddings that we find we can use for classifying frogs and bats and all sorts of good stuff. And and I think maybe one piece of intuition to inject is there's a nice line of researchers that were sort of undermining old school ways of doing few shot learning, where you'd sort of like put together these like curricula or like small problem sets and try to train on those. And basically said like, if you just step back and do like all against all classification training, get rid of your sort of subsets of problems, triplets and this sort of thing, you actually get a very strong model pretty quickly. They did this, I think, as a dumb baseline originally and then found they couldn't do it. And I think this is actually really similar to what we're seeing with the bird embeddings. We're, consistently finding that training on this 10,000 class problem gives good generalizable embeddings, and that it's actually really difficult to improve on using self-supervision methods that folks are sort of in one way or another.
Yeah, awesome insight. And also the part about the all versus all being beneficial is something we were actually worried about, which is downstream when we apply the model, we really only use it to match against this within the species. So it doesn't really have to discriminate. And we're worried about model capacity being taken up by this feature we were not using. So we trained another version where each batch, the model would only see the specific species to only discriminate within. And it became worse. So I guess all versus all really does work.
I think Shane had a question.
It's a long way to go for my. So as an end user, my simple question is, so is there like a backdoor like species detector hidden in here? Can you just give it a photo and ask them what leopard it is or what whale it is, or not individual, like at the species level?
It actually works really well for species.
Yeah.
Really well, even for some of the unseen species. One thing you have to be worried about is it doesn't really work for viewpoints, just because it's been trained to be viewpoint agnostic. Right. So it tries to minimize even if the viewpoints are different. But for species, it's really good.
Cool.
Like I would say 99% plus.
Anybody else? I'm standing.
Yeah. So what exactly is the output that one gets? What is a real ID? Exactly. Is it a set of numbers?
A ranked list with scores.
A ranked list of scores.
So and the list would be your user's choice of give me a ranked list of potentially matched individuals, leopard 1, leopard 2, or we also allow users to look at matched annotations, which under the covers would be matched embeddings.
Because I was wondering if at some level some of the features that you end up that the model end up picking up is pure morphometry. Okay, and whether those could be correlatable to genetic information, right? All vertebrates share the same set of genes for patterning the entire animal. So there might be a way in which these could, you could increase the interpretability. Okay, if you learn that some particular features that you're detecting, okay, are related to, what is the length of the femur divided by the length of these other, different portions of proportions, okay, that are scale independent and that could be tracked down to some genetic information.
Yes, one couple of indications we have, it's still mostly black box, and but we do know a couple of things. One is we have these crude class activation maps of what really prompted the model to excite. And once we shift to the multi-species models, the cams also shift in the sense of they start to lose sense in a human regard. So you'll see these weird artifacts like, for example, this checkerboard pattern right here, which just means that the algorithm is failing. Also, another thing we know is just from the bias of the model that we're using, it's not really good at making long spatial relations. So it's not really good at, say, taking an animal's length or a large shape, but it's really good at picking apart small textures and assembling those textures into like a chain of semantical features, similar to how with a cascade of neurons would work in a visual receptors of the human eye.
Very nice talk. Thank you very much. So you alluded to this towards the end of your talk. I just wanted to see if you could expand on this a little bit more. So you were talking about the applicability of some of your methods towards audio data. So if I had, I'm just guessing at this, but if I had like a spectrogram that had similar information content, whatever that means, to one of your images, would your approach work similarly well?
Yes, and to be clear about the similarity, there's two points. Audio data translated into spectrograms can seamlessly go into the same visual input, and CNNs that we use, it's pretty common to apply those to spectrograms. As for the labels, it can be individual ID, but not necessarily. So any kind of fine-grained classification, so this could be lots of species with little amounts of data or particular traits, could hypothetically be sensible to input in the algorithm.
I want to add, everything we do is open source. All these models are available. We're not going to do a thing where we say data or models available upon request. They're available, and we'll answer any question to provide them.
If you go back to the previous graph,
Oh yeah,
I found that very interesting.
this one?
No, the one where like you showed the jump in accuracy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Could you just like give a bit more detail on like the amount of data? It doesn't seem to be like a relation between like the amount of data you start with and the jump in accuracy you have. So I guess you already answered that. It's more like the quality of the data that is playing a role.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was just wondering like.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
And also like, what do you think is really like helping here? Like, is it like you're learning with this like multitask learning and these special laws, like better embeddings that then the classification layer can use, or like how would you like answer this big jump, an unexpected jump in performance?
So just to give you an idea, this would be just each model trained on each species. Like, I guess should have accounted for more resolution, but like starting from here, we have white-side dolphin, which probably have like 50 samples for. Like in the middle, you have white sharks, around 1,000 samples. And then this part is really the big part where you would have 10K plus samples or 1,000 plus individuals. So this was the part that really worked, because the accuracy you get is around 80% rank 1, which also means maybe like 95% rank 20, which means like in a ranked list in the interface, 95% of the time you'll see one of the correct individuals in a pool of thousands of possible matches. So that would be single species. But now we got them into the pool without balancing, just all together, but the loss kind of accounts for some of the balancing part. And then we saw this result, which is we did not increase the data, we just trained all of them jointly, which meant that features, I guess these would be the drivers, right? With lots of data, features learned here were useful here, pretty much. And another thing it tells us is sometimes not all of the features are useful. So this would be the leave and outer experiments where we excluded the species, and most of them do okay. The gap you'll see is reasonable, but as you go into more data, the gap grows. Less data, the gap closes. Also, some species, for example, beluga whales, are really different because they're drone shots. They don't have dorsal fins. They have no ridges. They have no patterning. So just the effect from all the other species was really small. But trained conjunctively, it wasn't better than single species, but it was just a tiny bit better. But another thing was when we did the data scaling experiments, and this is not for belugas, but the same behavior was observed for belugas as well, is that by adding less data, we have this logarithmic growth of, like, if this is the possible multi-species asymptote, 50% of the data gets us almost there. So kind of the amount of data you need for any new species coming in gets reduced, even if the model's not good right off the bat.
Sorry, I thought of one more question. You talked about sort of open world, and it was unclear to me from the talk. Let's say I'm a user of your system, and hey, I want to identify a new individual. How does that work? Do you have, since you've talked about a multi-classification head at top, does that mean I need to retrain the system before I can identify a new individual?
Yeah, not at all. So even though it's classification, it ultimately gives us better embeddings. That's the, I guess, the weird concept is we don't train classification because we're looking for classification. Just to fill in the context, classification would mean like this is the 100 individuals that we have, and you tell me it's this, or this. The embeddings are mappings which just say that we map them into some space where close together means same individual, further apart means different. Just like the semantic space you'd have, for example, in NLP with work-to-vec. So even though we train classification, the head forces the embeddings to be learned in a way that it's useful, that we chop off the head before the deployment and purely use the embeddings. So new individual coming in, you'll have no problem linking it up with other new individual.
From a very practical perspective, it means you log into the website as a user, you upload a photograph, machine learning draws a bounding box around the animal, predicts the viewpoint. You say, start match, this location, select the MUID algorithm, and then it will say, all right, you want this embedding matched against this catalog that matches that location of the known individuals in that location. The embeddings are matched. The system presents then, as a JSON payload, a ranked list of potentially matched individuals. Humans review that and then approve a decision, or optionally create a new individual. That new individual now has an embedding, which is ready for the next image to be matched in embedding space.
Cool. So now what I'm hearing, just to make sure I'm getting it, you train on this classification task, you remove the head, you use the embeddings for maybe a nearest neighbor classifier. And I'm just wondering, cosine distance, like what's happening?
Yeah, it's actually cosine.
Okay, cool.
Placeable
Thank
with
you.
Cosine. Yeah.
That and that was also very helpful explaining the interface. Thanks.
All right. Oh, one more.
Please come in.
What's the dimensionality of your embedding?
Embeddings is right now we use pretty large, around 2052, and basically the reason we use it is just we have no overhead, and it's tiny bit better than using smaller embeddings of around 256. But around lower than 200, you kind of start degrading your performance in a significant way. The requirements are a bit higher than image retrieval, just because it's more of a solver tasks than just a similar item retrieval where you can get by with 64-ish dimension.
I just had a couple of quick questions. So if you have a group who's working with you and they have underwater footage of, let's say, Tursiops, then when you would go to put your images in, you're saying you can take video as well as still photos, or you just do still photos?
We currently do still photos. We just honestly haven't taken the time to chop up video. We do not train AI to run natively on video. We would, even if we did AI on video, it would be in still frames currently.
And if if you have data from underwater and let's say aerial photos, would you do a search with just the photos of the video, the underwater video, and you do a certain search and then a separate one to compare with aerial photos?
Yeah, we would separate those specific viewpoints. Lasha actually has done experiments for belugas where we had a lateral catalog of individuals and an aerial catalog of individuals. It's a challenging problem, but it's a non-zero result.
It's a non-zero result. That's one of the things like we've been coming back to with the multi-species task, which is, especially belugas are pretty tricky. There's no reference point, but we've been trying to match complete nadir top-down images to laterals, and there's signal there. It was quite a long ago, so we haven't really got back to the problem, but now with many of the new species, like for example, turtles, there's two protocols, either full bodies or heads. So we can match full bodies to heads. Manta rays, it's either close-up belly shots or full bodies. Again, we can match. So really, the biggest constraint is whether there is information there and whether there's enough data to uncover the problem. Because if there is, the model does a pretty good job at honing down on the thing. Like one of the big constraints we recently relaxed and are pushing to relax more is the viewpoint, whereas we would have the strict, for example, for face matching, we would have the strict fronts. But now model does pretty well, even if the face is like partially left and still has a good chunk of the front side facing. So as long as you have this overlap, we can. The model's not best because the status quo is different and data that exists is different. But as we expand and use more, we kind of hope that we'll grow more and more into this.
Thank you so much.
Theoretical medicine.
All right, thank you all. Such an important work, and really, really appreciate you sharing. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we've all made it through day one of Decoding Communication of Non-Human Species. Thank you all for joining today. I think these talks kind of really cover the interdisciplinarity and the breadth and the just the amount of different skills and diversity of fields that need to come in and kind of tackle this problem. So it's really exciting that we're all coming together. Back here tomorrow, 9:30, and then also there's a dinner tonight at 6:30 at Shafi's house. You should all have an email for that. It's really a special night. We had one last year too, so I hope everyone could make it. And yeah, just enjoy kind of communicating with each other and sharing ideas. And we'll see you tonight and tomorrow. Thank you.